Hi everybody, my name is Colin Bridges and I am a motion designer and 3D artist. I am here to work with you on making a boulder for video games. Started off in Saturday morning cartoons, ended up designing my own video games and doing 3D for commercials and things like that. Now I'm really focused on video games and specifically environmental art, prop art, vehicles, anything like that. What I'm going to do is sort of do a fast and dirty boulder that looks okay, and then sort of show you if you wanted to refine it, you can keep going with it. But what I really want to do is show the whole process from the beginning when you have a sphere in ZBrush, getting it to a place where you can export it as an FBX on a low res mesh and a high res mesh, and then getting those into Substance Painters or Substance Painter, not Painters, where you can get a texture on it and tweak that texture a little bit, get everything ready to go into Unreal Engine. And I'll also show you the thought process. One of the really cool things about this is once you get started, you will wander around looking at rocks in a whole different way. Everywhere you go, you will see rocks and you will start looking at them and you will be like, ooh, that's interesting. It really does sort of change the way you see the world when you start 3D modeling things. I find really enjoyable. I used to not pay attention to rocks, and now I pay attention to rocks everywhere. So what I've done is I'm in ZBrush, and you notice that I don't have symmetry on. So you can hit the X button to get your symmetry on or off. Generally, for rocks, you're not going to need symmetry. But what I've done is I've start off with the crumple tool. And the crumple tool, if you hit the B button to bring up your brushes, and then the C button to bring up the C's, you're going to see a bunch of the C stuff. And crumple is 4, BC4. And I start with just a regular sphere, and it's not Dynameshed yet. I will Dynamesh it later, but right now I don't really care about the geometry very much. We're going to fix it later. We're going to make a form, and then we're going to detail it, but then we're going to break that back down into a low poly form. So what I'm doing is this is, you can see what I'm doing is I've got the crumple brush going, and I'm just working with a mouse right now. I do like to sculpt with a Wacom pad, but for right now I'm just using my mouse because it's a little easier to get the looks I'm doing. And what I'm doing is you can see I basically made the cursor almost as big or more than the entire model. If you just sort of hover and then float the mouse up and down over your object, it's going to make the sort of stratified layers. You want it to be flowing in the direction of where the water would be. To want to look like water has flowed around this rock. Now watch what happens if I drag this laterally, like left and right. Watch what happens. You can see it's going to go ahead and make that lateral stratification, which could be good. That's also something you're going to want at some point. Imagine that the river has sort of flown around it and it's sort of carved away lines. You can sort of see the track of the water as it goes around. I'm just going to call that happy accident for right now because we are going to tweak this, and no, I don't want to go into 3D mode. I'm going to tell you right now, I'm the king of hitting the wrong button in ZBrush. I have been using it for years, and yet I always seem to hit the wrong. I'm always hitting the accidental wrong button. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start tweaking this a little bit because you can see that it's a little too diagonal for me. I'm going to squish it. I'm going to squish it. This is starting to look good, a little bit good. When you're making games, I like to make modular rocks, which means that they can be good from lots of different angles. So if you work on it and then you flip it, you could duplicate it, use it several different ways. So you could embed it halfway in the ground and flip it, and it's a new rock. This particular one, I'm not going to go into all of that detail to try to do that. It is a little bit harder because you have to pay attention to every side. If you know a rock is going to be sort of half buried in something and you're never going to see the bottom, maybe you don't pay much attention to something that's not going to be seen. Now you can see what's happening is the way the crumple has worked. It sort of brought down this center. I'm not crazy about it. It's sort of interesting, but we're gonna work on that a little later. Also, one thing I forgot to do is I tend to take off dynamic perspective when you start. You can see the difference in the dynamic perspective is great, but I find that I tend, as a 3D modeler, to like to work orthographically. I don't really want to see too much of the camera distortion or any of that stuff. It's good to have the access to do it, but if you were really to pump this up to 100 to do the crumple, then you can really get some crazy stuff going. That looks really, I actually sort of dig that. Yeah, there we go. Okay. So far so good. So far so good. Groovy. All right. So this is your base rock, right? And you can see, I'm going to turn on the line fill down here at the bottom. You can see that this is 10,000 points. I don't really want to go in the final for the game. I don't really want to go much more over 20,000. Now, there's a feature called Nanite, which just came in with Unreal Engine 5.1, which could make some of the considerations about polygons a little bit irrelevant. Nanite lets you bring in a bunch of really high resolution models and it will low res them in real time for you, so it's great. But it's also a new feature, and so I think it's good to know still how to do the high poly to low poly process. I think Nanite's awesome, and I really hope that someday we can just make 5 million pixel rocks and throw them all in there and it doesn't cause any problems whatsoever. For now, we're still going to do the low res to high res workflow. I still haven't dynameshed it, right? So I'm looking for the general shape of what I'm making. And this is probably a tiny bit too rocky. You can see I've crumpled it probably a little too much. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and dynamesh this. I'm going to start sort of smoothing out some stuff that I want to smooth out. And I'm going to hit the S key and sort of go back down to a normal draw size. If you go over to your geometry and you go down to dynamesh, and right now the dynamesh resolution is 64, which is crazy low. I'll probably work in 600. Let's try that. And you can see that this has gone up with the dynamesh to 1.2 million. My laptop is a Razer GeForce RTX 2060, 8th gen Intel Core i7-8750H processor, 6 cores, 12 threads, up to 4.1 gigahertz. So the long and the short of that is I know from experience that my ZBrush starts to bog down between somewhere between 4 and 5 million. And for a boulder that probably, unless it's like a super hero-y boulder that for some reason it's going to get a lot of screen time, right in the center of the camera 2 inches away, I won't go more than 3 million on this today. If I were to go up to 7 million, my computer would start to hate me. Now we've got sort of a general boulder. Some of this detail just doesn't quite make sense, right? This weird, I don't know what you want to call it, but there's a really strong through line to this, which I think we probably need to get rid of, right? So I'm going to go and change to my smooth brush here, smooth a few of these out. One of the things it does is it does give it a wonderful rocky, it's a mixture of the smooth stuff and planar. And we can always come back in and crumple some of this again. The crumple will always be your friend when it comes to this stuff. Some of these details I really don't want to get. I love this line, right here. Keeping track of exactly what the functionality of the boulder is going to be. Do you need to have a character climbing on it? Do you need to have handholds? Or what exactly are you going to be using this boulder for in terms of interacting with the rest of the world? If this is going to be just a bunch of set decoration, you don't really have to worry quite as much about the logic of it. It's always good to be intentional about what you're doing, but you also want to let happy accidents happen and not overthink stuff too much. If it's, some of this stuff, you got to be a little careful with this. You can see it's really easy to leave sort of a fingerprint that there is a digital designer here. You don't want to look too, the whole idea is to make it look organic, right? You don't want to see or think that there was a person sculpting this. Although, again, that's a rule that can be broken. If you look at something like Fortnite or you look at other things, a stylized rock can be a really wonderful piece in a video game, but it's obvious that it's stylized. Now, see, this is the stuff we're trying to, this sort of fingerprint of very regular brush strokes and things like that. We're not in love with that stuff. Right here, you can see it. It just looks like a ZBrush rock stroke. I don't know another way to say it. It's just like a big giant sign that says ZBrush was here. So, some of this stuff is just going to be the trial and error of alt clicking to build stuff up. You can use the alt key to reverse the flow of a brush, and then letting go of the alt key and sort of carving it back down again. And there we go. And you can sort of go nuts with this. If you're having a meditative afternoon and you want to do this for like 18 zillion hours, it's sort of awesome. Now you can see also that, once you start to touch one part of the rock, you have to sort of go over the whole thing just to make sure that it's consistent. There we go. And here's another like ZBrush was here. Look at that. Yeah, like that just screams that there was a digital designer here. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this to my advantage. I'm going to do a little clay buildup, BCB. Don't worry that this alpha is square. I'm not going to worry about that right now. I just need to give it a little more body so that it comes back. And then back to the crimson order. There we go. Now this is again something where you'll have to go and clean it up, and like that will show up on that'll look gross. You don't want any of those brush marks to go. We're going to say imagine this is almost done, right? It's not. It's obviously got a lot of problems, issues. So let's just say good enough. You're never really happy with stuff. You just have to walk away from it. So let's just say that the deadline is hit. Somebody wants to see something, and we got a rock, right? So we're like, well, let's get this rock out of here. You can see we're still at 1.25 million polys. Not muy bueno for putting into a game program. First thing I'm going to do is you got to name your layers. If you're not naming your layers, I blow my nose at you, as they say in my pun. I blow my nose at you. We're gonna call this a high res. I know it does not look high res. There's just so much junk on it, but don't worry, we shall fix. We're at 1.2 and we need to get this down to like 10 or 20,000. Okay, so we're gonna duplicate this. We're gonna rename it boulder low res. All right. I don't want the same color on my high res as my low res. There we go. Let's see. Let's auto group this. It's so dense. It's dark. It's so we're going to fix that though. Okay. So we have our geometry. There we go. Low res. We're going to go down to the geometry tab and we're going to turn off the Dynamesh for one thing. Don't need to Dynamesh this anymore. And we are going to ZRemesh it. Let's see, this goes by 1,000, so 5,000. We're gonna go ahead and make this 20,000 or so. Let's just type it in. And we don't have a lot of edges or creases or anything like that. I'm going to go ahead and detect edges just to see, make sure it doesn't change everything too crazy go nuts. And it's going to do its thing. 1.2 really isn't that much for ZRemesher, so this shouldn't take more than a few seconds, but if it turns out to be a long time, we'll cut ahead. So now we've got down to 20,000. Pretty sweet. The low res and the high res are good to go. See, much easier on the eyes. You can see what's going on there. But it's still the same rock. It's still, not that different. Next step, we're going to export this. So we're going to go to Z plugin, and we're going to go to FBX export. And really all you need is selected. So we're gonna make sure we do the low res. Okay. Z plugin, selected. You can ignore all this stuff about bins and ASCII and all that stuff. All right, so I'm going to call it boulder low res, and then we're going to do boulder high res. So we're going to turn this off and we're going to select that. Z plugin, selected, export. I'm going to show you how to do the auto unwrap of the UV in Substance Painter. In a perfect world, you would have the UV unwrap. For a boulder, it doesn't really matter that much because we're going to use textures and stuff that don't make a lot of seams or anything like that. But for other stuff, like if you're doing a spaceship part or something, a box, if you're doing something that the seams are more important, I would make sure that you have a UV wrap for that material. You want to have your object with a UV unwrap. Substance Painter does need that. It will auto unwrap a boulder pretty easily though. More complicated stuff, it's a little more dicey. So we're going to close out ZBrush for now. We're going to make ourselves a rock. I use the Unreal Engine 4 starter assets. That's what we're on. I am going to work at a 2048 resolution. I keep it in DirectX. The one thing I want to do is auto unwrap, and we're going to select the file, and we're going to import the low res. We're going to go over to the texture set. We're going to add in ambient occlusion to the channel, and then we're going to bake the mesh map. Okay, now some of these you really don't need, but also it doesn't really matter if they're there. So some people will turn stuff off, the ID or the thickness position. I don't know. I just leave them on there. I'm not gonna, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So 2048, I'm gonna go with 2048. I'm going to put in the high res FBX as what are called high poly parameters. So it's gonna make a normal map of all of the high resolution detail that conceivably we carved into our boulder that we spent 12 weeks sculpting. No, please don't spend 12 weeks on one boulder, says your creative director. The one thing you can do is you can mess with the distances just to make sure that you're that's what you don't want to see. If you see any red or something, just bring out your frontal distance a little bit so that you make sure your normal map catches everything. There's other stuff you could mess with if you want, but honestly for this, we're just going to leave it. We're going to bake the selected texture. And see, it's not the greatest UV map that I made, as you see it. It's sort of, but it's going to be fine. It's processed everything, and now we're going to go return to painting mode. We got ourselves a rock, right? And you can see that we've got all this detail is actually a normal map detail that we have baked on. So that's fantastic. This is still a 20,000 poly rock. Great. Here's one of the things that I discovered that no one told me. There are two kinds of materials in Substance Painter. There's what I call regular materials. I'm sure there's an official name for them. And then there's smart materials. And smart materials have a bunch of other things built on top of the base material, like, rust mats and dings and various generators, and there's just a lot sort of pre-built onto them. Let's imagine this was a metal rock, right? If you want this look, that's great. There's something actually sort of cool about it. Very difficult to resize. If you want to change the scale of this stuff, or if you want to change the mapping, maybe you don't want it to be UV mapped. Maybe you want it to be triplanar map. I'm on the dirt layer right now. Watch what happens if I go from the UV projection to the triplanar projection. Nothing's happening. I can't really tweak the dirt layer that much. And as a control freak, that freaking grinds my cheese. I don't like it. If you go into the regular materials, plastic grid bumpy, maybe we can do that. Okay, there we go. Let's say we need to tweak anything that's on this. I can go into the plastic grid bumpy projection. Look at that. Look at that beautiful. I can tweak the bejesus out of that. I can shove stuff back and forth. I can get stuff to match up over the seams. I can do all sorts of stuff. For rocks, concrete is going to be your friend. We're going to do concrete dusty. Look at that. Already, I am happy with this rock. It's already looking like a rock. I dig it. Now, there's all sorts of problems that if you look real close, like, not crazy about that. Not great. I'm going to change this triplanar projection. That's already looking pretty good, right? There's a bunch of stuff we can do to make this, like, to plus this up, as far as like putting moss on it and putting some more wear on it and that kind of stuff. I think we're getting a little bit long today for the tutorial. We are going to probably put a pause on this for today. So we'll call this part 1, but we're going to come back in part 2 and take this sort of generic, pretty good, okay rock and turn it into something awesome. We're going to mess with the colors. We're going to put some moss on it. We're going to put some cracks and stuff in it. If this was going to be like far away in your scene, if you had that in Unreal and that's all it was going to be, you're done. Like, just throw it on there, you're good. But if your character is going to climb on it and your character is going to walk on it and your character is going to throw it or do whatever, we got to tweak this stuff a little bit. Yeah, we're going to come back in the next episode. Take it easy, guys. I will talk to you very, very soon.